Hi Neil, super to meet up with you at the range as always and do some further work on your game. The majority of the session obviously related to your distance wedges, and we'll come to that a little bit later, but as per your request I just thought I'd go over the two swings that we filmed, hitting some looseners. Really good barometer really to in regards to where your game's come in the last few months. Loosening up shots, no real time to get into any real sort of real groove with the swing, and we're starting to see some nice changes based on the things we've discussed. The loading of the levers on the way back, the way the wrists and the right arm fold, happening much more incrementally. No more sort of artificially wide takeaway where the right arm was being forced off the chest. You see I've put some dots on the screen there for you, face on. One thing I do think we need to maybe, just keep our eye on is this tendency for the upper centre to get out in front of the lower centre. That's just something to bear in mind. If you just push your hips forward an inch or so at that point, that will get these two centres stacked on top of one another in a more appropriate manner. So having said that, from there, making a really good first move away, club doesn't stay low to the ground anymore, doesn't get pushed out in front of you when viewed from down the line. No severe twisting of the shaft as we approach the top of the backswing. Much more, arms are working much more in sympathy with the body. We don't get that sort of body stopping, arms lifting look that we previously had. And then as we transition, we used to get back of the left hand accumulator 3 releasing quite severely, pulling the club out above the plane line, moving it onto your left arm too fast at P5.5. See now the club's hitting the right forearm. That's a result of the drill that we use when we hit the push shots. The feeling of hitting a big push is something that you need to play around with in practice just to keep the swing aligned. You don't need to be thinking of that when you're hitting a full shot. I think that view from face on is really good. Lower centre move well forward. Shaft leans in there. Zero chance of you hitting the ground behind the ball with any great regularity from that, making that sort of move. So we don't need to think continuously about hitting the big push. But the drill where we try and hit the push and just spend a little bit of time there in practice is to keep this sweet spot in rather than letting it drift out well in front of the hands as was the norm when we first met. You move through the golf ball now, much less flexing. You used to get from down the line, you used to get the neck flexing, you used to get the right knee over flexing, we used to get a gap opening up between the knees here, which we don't get anymore. When viewed from face on, much better separation of the two centres. As discussed, you could release the head a little bit sooner just to allow the rate of closure to be a little bit less, just to allow the body to keep turning a little bit more freely. But all in all, a really good progression since we first met up. So if we take a little look at your wedge play, the key thing here is to obviously appreciate some of these moves are appropriate depending on the type of shot that we wish to play. However, unfortunately, at the start of the session, we were playing most shots, irrespective of trajectory and requirements, as per the left-hand footage. So if we look initially, we got the ball well back at the centre of the arc. We've got the shaft leaning forward, a little bit more than would be the norm, but not massively excessive. As we come through the hit or into the hit, we get the butt of the club well advanced at delivery, almost directly over the top of the ball, and then we keep the handle well in front of the club coming into impact. One of the things we discussed was because of the shallow nature of the approach with a wedge play, even though I want to be hitting down on a wedge, The angle of attack is still going to be relatively shallow. Therefore, there is going to be a situation where contacting the ground slightly before the ball will occur. It's not a problem. I mentioned a video that Andrew Rice had done where he demonstrates nicely that there is something that does happen. Didn't really go on to explain why. It's just an occurrence that we see when players are hitting wedge shots. Therefore, with so much shaft lean coming into it, the tendency now is to bottom out slightly behind the golf ball with no bounce, meaning that the leading edge will dig into the ground too much. Quite an unforgiving way of chipping and pitching. So from there, we're running the risk of catching it heavy, or to stop catching it heavy, what we'll start to see is a butt of the club that gets pulled up very quickly, bringing the club out of its descent. Not in this case, but can happen, leading to shots that are caught thin. We also have a situation where we're going to catch the ball high up on the face, meaning that the ball speed's potentially going to increase and the spin rate's going to come down. So that was your sort of standard wedge shot at the start of the session. Ball relatively far back, weight forward, plenty of shaft lean coming into impact, and obviously we discussed the potential for low point issues. What we ask you to do here is create the same sort of trajectory as we've got here with a 56. So we've got a 56 degree club in our hand, but we're presenting about 47, 48 degrees of loft at impact. On the right, I've asked you to take your pitching wedge stroke 9 iron, but create the same 56 degree trajectory. And straight away I've asked you to do that. We see that the shaft doesn't lean as far forward at setup. Shaft sitting more vertically. The loft that's clearly on the club face starts to be maintained through the hit a little bit more as well, as we'll see as this swing progresses. The golf ball at setup is not quite as far back of the centre of the arc. As we swing the club back, very, very similar move. However, the big changes start to happen as we approach impact. Obviously sent you some images across that offer some more detail into these key areas. But the club doesn't get as advanced. Angle of attack becomes shallower. Shaft leaning much less. We just miss impact on that one. But as you can see, we're bottoming out slightly behind the golf ball, which is what we discussed before. But we've now got all the bounce that's available to us, so the club will not dig in. Therefore, there isn't as much need to pull the club out of its descent. So what we're seeing is a shallowing out of the delivery in this footage on the right. The shaft recovering more, so the club head catching up with the hands a little bit quicker. And we can see as we come through, we've got a little bit more flex in the left wrist, much higher overtaking rate. Trajectory of the golf ball coming out the studio, very similar, if not a little bit higher on the right. So even though we've got less loft in our hand that's set up, it's the loft at impact. We're creating the loft that we want. That's the important thing. Presenting the correct or desired loft at impact. And we can do that with any number of clubs by applying any number of variables. And that will start to drive the sort of technique. We can see here that we've got a little bit more flex in that lead wrist as opposed to a flatter scenario. The way we summarised this was that, both these actions would work. The one on the left is ideally suited to playing a low runner up the green. The one on the right is more ideally suited to a soft, higher shot, to maybe a tight pin over a bunker. Neither's really right or wrong. It just needs to be appropriate for the scenario you find yourself in. Unfortunately, at the start of the session, just to summarise again, we were trying to play every shot as per the footage on the left, which is not going to work. So good session. Look forward to taking this further during the coming months. Have a great Christmas and look forward to a productive 2016. Well done.